Can you hear me? Does it sound good? Okay. Thank you for coming. My name is Angela Hill, and this is my brother, Ed Hill. We're here to present on the enemies among us. We are both two former intelligence analysts and federal contractors for the U.S. government.
Again, my name is Ed Hill. I actually worked as a SIGINT analyst in the United States Navy and defense contracting.
Right, and we're here today with our company, JDEX LLC. We're an information technology consulting company, and we also do cybersecurity services.
Pretty much focused on cybersecurity risk audit. So we're just trying to help people actually be compliant if you're doing any business with the U.S. government, for example. We also do data visualization. So the last gentleman talked a little bit about data visualization. What we're really focused on is the geospatial part of that. So as an intel analyst, we use geospatial data all the time.
We also do managed services, information management, technical training, and web development. So what we're here to talk about today is actually provide situational awareness on the threats that are out there, and also to share with you our story about working in the intelligence community and how we actually were considered spies. So if you were to ask a foreign service about us, we're probably on some list somewhere. I actually know that I am on a list somewhere because when I travel internationally, I get pulled into what they call secondary, and I know that on my passport, there's something on my passport that says, this person is a prior intelligence professional. But what we're here today to tell you about is how the world of espionage isn't really like James Bond. It's really about gathering information, and we're dispelling the rumors that, this here is Homeland, the TV show that you've all seen, but it's actually really good propaganda for the intelligence community, so it's not really like that. The whole purpose of an intelligence organization is to collect information and to look at data from different data sources. So all the different data sources actually equal intelligence.
Yeah, so, piggyback on that a little bit that was kind of something that was really foreign to me when I first got into the intelligence community. I really thought that there was this really big secret behind intelligence. What it really is, again, it's just information, gathering that information, and it's how we use it in the processes we use for that data.
And before we get into that, we want to share with you our background as intelligence professionals and what we did. So I actually started my intelligence career after college. I joined the U.S. Navy. You'll see on the photo here, we come from a Navy family. My dad was in the Navy, my grandfather was in the Navy, and my dad coached me towards working in intelligence. And I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what I was getting into. So I actually had a civilian career and a reservist career at the same time.
And me, yeah, so my story was a little bit different. So my sister is a couple years older than me, so she was actually already in college. I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do yet, so I knew that I was probably going to have to work 2 jobs to put myself through college. So right out of high school, I went directly into the Navy and went into the SIGINT field. Next slide. And I was actually stationed on the USS Chosen, but the SIGINT was basically focused on doing signals collection and foreign communications, so basically monitoring the UHF, HF spectrum, and we were doing mass volumes of data collection for the U.S. Navy, all went back to NSA.
And I was an imagery analyst and an intelligence specialist. So my focus was looking at imagery from satellites and providing situational awareness to my stakeholders. And I also worked towards geospatial analysis, so GIS, Geographical Information Systems. What is geospatial intelligence? Geospatial intelligence is actually the ability to take layers of intelligence and put it onto an image, whether it's moving or whether it's static, like here. And that allowed me to help my stakeholders understand their situation visually, and also to make decisions quickly based off of the different layers of intelligence that were on top of it, or the different types of layers of information. So these are the agencies that we actually work for. I've supported the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, also the National Geospatial Agency, which is the agency that looks at imagery and geospatial analysis. And I also worked for the Department of the Army.
And myself, so I obviously worked for the Navy. After I got out of the Navy, did defense contracting, and worked on an NSA contract out of Colorado. Then also from there, went back to the East Coast, being near family, and worked for what was called the Counter IED Operations Integration Center. Long acronym, a lot of acronyms in the military, right? So what that was is a joint task force of various different entities all working to help defeat the threat of IEDs. So there's a lot of data involved in that. And then moved on to the Army Corps of Engineers, where we actually worked on that information as well to compile information to help find out where the IEDs were going off and how to stop that.
So I have this slide of 9/11 here. And what's important about this slide is that we entered the intelligence community during a time of transition in the United States. So you may remember that there were rumors that maybe an intelligence service knew about the weapons of mass destruction or the attacks that were potentially going to happen during this time. But what we're talking about is that we actually entered this world when there was a paradigm shift. So the intelligence world at the time before 9/11, they weren't really talking to each other. They were siloing information. And so we were a part of this transition where information management became key. Taking advantage of virtual environments was crucial. And data governance played into place.
So what we, with this, what we're going to focus on here was, and I was a big part of this, so I actually saw it differently than my sister. I was in it before that shift had happened, so I saw how there was entities that just wanted to keep their information to themselves and not really share that. So, and that was kind of I guess something that we fought against with different agencies. So information sharing is key. We see the same things happening, though, on the commercial sector. So you have departments and companies that don't want to share their information. There's this, my data is mine, we're not going to share it. So we help with that. Then the data validation. So kind of what the last speaker was talking about with the data cleansing. We want to make sure that your data is clean. So in able to make actual intelligence, you've got to have good data. Okay? And then we help people with open source analysis. So looking at public records, bringing that information in to help your processes and validate that data that you have internally, but also use outside sources to get that information. And then what we also want to focus on is helping to apply a true intelligence cycle to your information management, your data practices. So actually looking at from the collection phase, looking at the planning phase of your information collection, the analysis, and then actually the ability to report and disseminate that information to the people who need it.
And what's also important to note during this time after 9/11 is that 2 agencies actually came to being because of the events. So Homeland Security started, and so did the National Directorate of Intelligence, which their directive was strictly to help all of the agencies talk to each other, to communicate with each other. And so we were a part of a time where virtual communities started and transparency happened in the organization through information management and data governance. So this was also a time when the internet was relatively new. So I lived in virtual environments in my career. I was communicating globally with different stakeholders to perform operations. So initially I started out doing strategic intelligence, but then worked my way towards more tactical operations. So I was actually supporting live ops, and we were managing data, various data sources all over the world. And so this brings me to my next slide. I actually left the CIA about 3 years ago. I was a targeting officer. And so part of this talk is about providing awareness around the threats that are out there and what I learned as a targeting officer and how it's relevant to your business or the way that you manage your data. So my job was twofold. So it was human collection. So gathering intelligence through means of knowing, interacting, or we call it social engineering I've learned on the outside. My job was to help recruit for sources and to also provide awareness or prevent the threats from happening in the United States. So this was the world of espionage, right? And how, we're telling you that data and espionage goes hand in hand. So we want to educate you on why a foreign service or a foreign actor would want your data. What do they want? And how can you prevent yourself from being a victim of espionage? And before I move on to that slide and telling you about that, something to think about is that there are 100,000 agents working in the United States to collect information. That should hit home.
Yeah, I mean, so like a lot of times I think most people that I talk to, they think, hackers, right? They think that it's a lone person, maybe a group of people going after entities. But what we're saying is there's actually foreign service agents here operating in the United States who are working in your companies and in your business, and you wouldn't even know it. So. Right.
And what do they want? There are several things that they want. They want to understand the United States. Their first objective probably is to recruit people. So they're recruiting, they're collecting intellectual property, proprietary intellectual property. They're trying to get access to a target that they may have in the United States. They're also going after critical U.S. infrastructure, and this is the piece that I think a lot of businesses don't think about, is that they may interact with U.S. infrastructure that is considered critical by Homeland Security. And then they're supporting ongoing ops that are happening in the United States or future operations. So in West Michigan, we don't think that we would be a target for collection of data, but in my eyes, it's probably one of the easiest places to collect information. And so here you'll notice the slide of Al Pacino and Colin Farrell from the movie Recruit. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but this movie kind of talks about the CIA and their objective. So Al Pacino is recruiting Colin Farrell to join the CIA. And so something to note about recruitment is that when we look for targets or people, we want to understand if they're ideologically motivated or financially motivated to commit treason to their country. And so Ed has a good story about he was actually approached by a foreign service while working in D.C.
Yeah, so I was actually working outside D.C. in Herndon, Virginia. So the way it works is, a lot of places around here even will have key card access. So, we had a top secret clearance, so sensitive compartment of information. Different groups had access to information. So you wear your lanyard and you have your key card access. They taught us part of the physical security part of that is to, whenever you get out of work or something, you're going to put your lanyard away so nobody can see it, right? So for me, I got out of work and it was Valentine's Day, going to go get a card for Valentine's Day. Went into Target. The only thing that was showing was maybe the top of my lanyard. So I really don't know when this gentleman actually targeted me. But what happened was I'm looking at the cards and he approaches me very nonchalantly. And for me, it's a little weird. For one, you don't usually just approach random strangers at the grocery store, right? So just starts with a small talk conversation. I thought it was strange, and so actually, I don't need to do this right now. I walked off somewhere else. The guy kind of followed me around. And then at one point approaches me, he's like, oh, hey, I really like your coat, which I thought was funny because it was about a 3-year-old coat. It wasn't anything that special. Asked me where I got it. So again, that was a little weird. Walked off and I went back to get the cards. The gentleman then follows me back right next to me and starts asking me probing questions. So, what do you do for a living? So, for me, I kind of knew what this was at that point. So I actually, I do IT work and I did some training too, so I was like a technical trainer. So that was the answer I gave him. And then, after a little bit of back and forth, he asked me if I was happy with what I'm doing. I was like, oh yeah, I'm very happy. He's like, how about financially? Like, are you making good money? I was like, I'm doing all right. Thank you for your time. Grab my stuff. And as soon as I said no to him, and he realized that it wasn't an option, he actually set down the basket that he had, walked straight out of the building, and was on his phone. So. My sister can speak to what that was.
Right, and since I worked in operations for the agency and their operational division, that was something that was called a pitch. So when we're going after a target, first we do a bump, so you casually may run into somebody and introduce yourself, have a common something in common with each other, and then they'll try to befriend you. But in his case, they actually pitched him. So they actually offered him some type of monetary substance, so to see if he would be willing to give information or to develop a friendship. And that's how they recruit sources. So the next slide is still here's Al Pacino in the movie, and he's caught. He's the knock, so it's a non-official cover. And this is something I want to help businesses be aware of, is that there are people working in your businesses today pretending to work for your organization, and they pose as a member of another profession. So they could be a businessman, they could be a social engineer, a doctor, but their whole objective is to collect information on your company, to take that information back. So a form of social engineering. These people have fake IDs, fake names, fake documents. They have no affiliation to their host country, and they also have no diplomatic immunity to their foreign service. So if they're caught, they will never disclose that they work for Mossad or whatever foreign service is out there. And so they're not this guy. This is not the guy that's going to look like a spy. They actually will be somebody that looks like this. Does anybody know who this is? Raise a hand. Can you,
yeah.
What's her name?
Julia Child.
That's Julia Child. So you may not know this, but Julia Childs was actually a spy. She was a spy during World War II for the U.S. Strategic Service. This was the forerunner for the CIA. So think about that when you're interacting with people in your businesses, is that they don't look like James Bond. They aren't running around shooting people. They look like this person right here. They look like your mother. They look like your father. They look like the guy walking down the street. And so this next slide is about me as a targeter and how would I go after information. So let's pretend that Waldo is my target, and I have different ways to get to Waldo. So I have his grandmother at the top, right? And then I have his best friend from college. I also have some colleagues that I have identified as somebody that interacts with Waldo. And then I have the local business that he does daily interactions with. I'm trying to figure out, how do I go after Waldo? So I eliminate Grandma because she could potentially tell him that, you know, oh, I had somebody come to me and talk about this. I also eliminate the best friend because there's a close affiliation. My bump to them might be something that he might know. And then I eliminate the colleagues because they don't have enough information on Waldo. But the business that he interacts with, that has all of his proprietary information, all of his credit cards, anything that I want, that I'm targeting, they actually have poor data practices and they lack information management. So it's really easy for me to walk into that building and to social engineer information, or to have a device with me that may collect information from their systems. So that would be my avenue of access. So your businesses may be an avenue of access. And you may think that your data isn't important, but it actually is. And so I would like to have you think about, do you interact with important clients? Do you interact with clients that have U.S. infrastructure? Because that's the primary objective of a foreign service, is the intellectual property, but also collecting information on the 16 U.S. infrastructure. So these are 16 sectors in the United States that are considered critical by Homeland Security. And I can guarantee that most, or not all of you, have worked in, with, or for one of these sectors. That's their objective. Their objective is to gather intelligence on any of these organizations, or these key infrastructure. And within the Grand Rapids here, according to the Right Place, I actually did some research. These are the top industries in Grand Rapids that are considered critical U.S. infrastructure.
Now, something to note with that, like, you may not right now work in one of these industries, but you may work with or you may be a client, or you may have them as a client, right? So if they're a client, then again, they're vulnerable, or you're vulnerable because they're vulnerable. So just keep that in mind. So that's what we're trying to educate people on, is that there's other ways that they can get at this information.
Right, your business base may be a potential avenue of access to them gathering information. So if I were still working for an intelligence organization, I would be targeting businesses that have poor data practices, that don't have physical security, their virtual security is not existent, and I'd be going after them. And yeah. That's okay.
If you suspect NLC, how would you report? Can you report the person, or who would you report?
I'm sure that there's, I'm sure there's mechanisms for that. I think we would probably have to follow up on that for you.
Yeah.
But we're still very well connected into the agencies and the intelligence community, so I'm sure I can get an answer for you on that.
Yeah. So that's something to think about is, do you interface with any of these these types of industries? Because if you do, your information is critical. I would want to gather as much information through social engineering or going through virtual means to gather the intel from these organizations. And an example of this, this last spring in 2018, there was an attack on the U.S. Electrical grid system by the Russians. And what we found out is that the Russians didn't go through directly to the U.S. grid system to gather the information. They actually went through small to medium-sized businesses, third-party vendors that worked with the grid system that had poor data practices. So that's something to think about. Like, these services, these foreign actors and enemies are going through businesses that don't regulate their data, that don't think that their data is important. We're here to tell you that that data is important. You may have floor plans of these buildings, which they're conducting operations in the United States. Like I said earlier, there's 100,000 agents working in the United States. They're not working just in the East Coast and the West Coast. They're hitting everything. So what can we do? What are solutions for that? And precautions.
So the first thing, is obviously physical security. And so I've worked in this area of West Michigan, so I've seen varying degrees of physical security. I've been in some organizations where there's absolutely no physical security, and other organizations that are actually doing it really well and doing a good job of physical security. What that means is, being able to have badge key card access. If it's someone that is not part of your organization, you haven't vetted, being able to maybe do escorts or have somebody escorted along when they're going through that. So just think about different ways you can do physical security.
Right, like no tailgating.
Right.
Right, so we say, or having even a physical security, having a badge to get into the building, or a turnstile that you have a code to punch in. That would be a good form of physical security. Not letting clients go through sensitive areas. So areas where you might have information on your computers where it would be considered proprietary or confidential information.
Lock your screens when you walk.
Yeah, right. Lock your workstations. Don't let clients go through those areas. Also, maybe even put things on your system like a data compliance package, so it can validate or you can wipe out an employee's computer if they left the organization. You can also perform cybersecurity services, so the audit, compliance, and risk assessments and audits can help you to be secure. There's a National Institute of Standards of Technology, NIST, requirements that are out there.
For anyone that does work with the government. So if you have any contracts with the federal government, then you actually have to adhere to that standard.
And then providing operational security for your employees. So just having them have the awareness of the different types of attacks that are out there, the vulnerabilities, so phishing, the knowledge that there are foreign services out there gathering the information. And then providing background checks and security checks.
And this is stuff that most businesses will do, but it's just another thing, a layer of security that you can apply.
And that really wraps up our talk. We don't.
Yeah. So one thing that I would like to touch on. So you may find it interesting that we said information sharing, and we told you about all these ways that people can get information. So what we hope you do is you do the vetting of that information, or those people that are actually accessing your information, your data, but also being able to facilitate the sharing of that information with those you trust. So there are different tools and mechanisms out there that can do that, and we're happy to help anybody do that if you need any assistance. So.
Any questions?
Yes.
You guys work with decision modeling notation at all? Like when you were doing your information integration?
So to be honest, when we were in all the I guess common practices weren't really there yet. Some of the data, more the data scientists in NSA and things like that were doing those things. But for us as I guess starting out lowly intel analysts and collectors, when I was on a ship I was a collector. So it's an evolution in your career. You're almost compartmentalized in what you actually learn and what you do. So the Navy does intel collection different than the Army. And the Air
Every
Force,
agency
yeah, every agency has their own way of doing it. I didn't realize that until actually I got out of the Navy and started, I thought, hey, if we do everything, we're awesome. But then working in the defense, as a defense contractor where I was working with alongside Army personnel, Marines, Air Force, you see this wider picture. They do a really good job of limiting what your knowledge is when you're in the service.
And based on your classification level too, you might not have the need to know. But you have a good example of collaboration and communication working with the COIC, right?
Well, the COIC, yeah, so with the COIC, I was actually, that job, I was actually going around the world, essentially, to different intelligence sites.
What's
and
the COIC again?
Counter ID Operations Integration Center, and facilitating the sharing of information. So we had about, I think, 5 internal software tools that we had developed, but then also, which a lot of people think is interesting and funny, especially at the time, SharePoint wasn't that great, but that was one of the only ways that we were sharing information. So Microsoft was working heavily with the intelligence community, and they actually went in, and all their engineers were in the intelligence community, and they were helping us to set up these things. So we were going to the different facilities and federating the nodes. This was kind of before the cloud and everything, right? So we were making sure that information was shared back and forth using that.
We were using Wikipedia as well.
Yeah, Wikipedia's.
We call it Intelpedia.
Right. Keeping information about everything that we need to do. And then you had, as an analyst, you had access to all of that information, so you could pull it up, anywhere.
And this was building, I would call, a shared consciousness within
Right.
our culture. So the virtual environment, making sure that the agencies were all transparent, allowed us to share information freely and to build direct relationships because life mattered. So like I, working at the very bottom, could easily identify my counterpart, not only within the agency, but other external agencies as well.
And that's some of the stuff that we're hoping that we can help translate to businesses, right? So being able to establish that your experts are the guys at the lower levels, right? So they're the ones that are doing the work, where you have the decision makers, typically like a hierarchical structure, right? And often some of that insight that's happening at the bottom level isn't making it up to the top. So we try to help the organizations make that structure flat, at least from a data management standpoint, so that information from the experts can get up to that top level so the decision makers are actually making decisions based off of true insights.
So what did happen with the COIC? With the IEDs and...
Oh, actually, that was when I was an Army Corps engineer.
Oh,
so
sorry.
I was recruited away from COIC to the Army Corps engineers. So actually, I was a federal civilian reporting to a 3-star general. And in that sense, I was hired as an intel specialist. They wanted to know why they were losing lives, obviously, through all the IEDs that are happening. This is around 2015. So if you remember in the news, every day you had IEDs going off, numerous IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan. What was happening is that was specifically targeting the Army Corps engineers. Because what they were doing, I don't know if any of you know, but the Army Corps engineers specifically, they're not, I always thought, hey, they built the dams, right, in New Orleans, they built Washington, D.C., so they build stuff. They're not really builders anymore. They're actually the largest contracting firm in the world. So they contract everything out. So we had roughly 20 project managers, program managers stateside that were managing multi-million-dollar budgets in Iraq and Afghanistan for contingency operations. So they're building schools, they're building border patrol centers, they're building wells, things like that in these areas. Now, what was happening, though, was, so I got there and I'm like, okay, first thing I want to know, I'm a very visual person. Where are your project sites? And to be able to tackle this. So when we're finding out where the project sites, they hand me a stack of spreadsheets. And, for me, or like even access to databases, that's not helpful for me. So what I ended up doing is I actually went through and I cleaned the data, and I then took that and I plotted it on something very simple, Google Earth. So I put all that information in Google Earth, plotted all where all the sites were. Then I actually partnered with different agencies to get reporting. I overlaid the real-time reports on top of that data. And then we actually made a connection with the National Geospatial Agency and NRO, so National Reconnaissance Office. And during wartime, so this was a really big deal, we were able to reallocate satellites that were actually focused on missions to actually map every single contact we had. And I'm talking over 50,000 places that we were building stuff. We got physical imagery of where the sites were. And what we found out was roughly 80% of those sites were not where we thought they were. Which that was the crazy part of it, because what would end up happening, and through this process we started talking with the people in the field to find out what was actually going on. So what we found out there was that we would have a project manager who had a budget. He would then contract out a real estate agent who would go into Iraq and Afghanistan, and they'd go to purchase a property. And then the person that's selling the property, oh, no, that one's not available. That's my cousin's, but you can buy this one over here. So what they would do is they would then make that deal, they close the deal. It might be a couple miles away, it might be, fairly close, but it wasn't where we thought it was. So then our logistics route, the people who were doing the planning and logistics, were putting them in areas where it was that we knew, but they didn't, that was, strategically a bad place and where they could end up having ideas. So by plotting all that and seeing that, we called it a common operating picture, we were able to see exactly what was happening, where ideas were going on, and then we were able to reroute those logistics and those supplies and help save a lot of lives.
Right, so it's basically providing a holistic solution by looking at your operations with all the information linked together.
I've got about 4 minutes. So any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.